Welcome to Pleasure as a Revolutionary Act. This is a collective exploration of pleasure, not as a distraction or an indulgence, but as something vital. And we're coming together to discuss and ask the question, is pleasure essential in becoming more human, to feeling the ache of the world without losing our capacity to love, create, and imagine? I'm your host, Vive Oldham, and I'm introducing you now to a wonderful storyteller, Libby Rose Waite. Libby is a mythopoetic therapist, embodiment guide, and dream witch devoted to helping others access the imaginal realms. Her path has been shaped by depth psychology, tantra, and the somatic arts, and most profoundly by a deep trust in the mystery of life and its guidance towards wholeness. She believes in the revolutionary power of dreams to heal, connect, and restore, and to her dreams are portals into our innate aliveness, interconnection, and magic. They call us back into the wildness of being, the wisdom of the earth, and the mystery at the centre of it all. She envisages a world where dreams are remembered as sacred, where we learn to move with the wisdom of the image and the story, and where the animating forces of life guide us into fuller, more authentic living. She's sharing a pertinent myth. In her words, this is pleasure from the ruins, the myth of Psyche and Eros. In fact, as Libby says, it is perhaps one of the first fairy tales. And my hope is that you take this story and you let this story work you over the duration of the summit, or for as long as it takes you to listen to the interviews, because this story is so rich and the way that Libby tells it has a whole new flavour. So I welcome you to settle in and enjoy.
Thank you, Vive. It's such a pleasure to be here. Excuse the pun, but it really is, and to be, sharing this myth which has brought so much aliveness actually into my life, into my dreams, into the way that I've kind of got more and more involved in stepping right into the center of myths and having a look around and seeing what comes to us when we start, interacting with not only the characters, but the objects, the inanimate objects that are in that myth that have somehow found their way right into the center of the stories over thousands of years of originally, verbal retellings of them. And now the little details that get written down, and to kind of see what happens when we reanimate them, which is actually one of the meanings of the word psyche. It means breath, it means anima, to reanimate with life. And so that's what we'll be doing with her story today.
Wow, I love that. And I love that because for me, it's about what animates the body. It's about what animates us, and it brings in life force. So that's just a beautiful place for us to begin, I think.
Mm. Yeah. And this story is, it's rippling with pleasure. And the three central characters, maybe the listeners will know the energies of them, or the energies of the word. So of course we have Psyche. And as I just said, Psyche means breath, but it also means butterfly in Greek, and it also means soul. So we have here at the heart of the story, soul. And this is a word that's been, kind of extrapolated from those three original meanings when we put it with things like psychology, which once upon a time meant the study of soul. When I did a master's in psychology, I certainly didn't find that it was a study of soul. And we also have it in psychotherapy, which means to tend to soul. And if you're lucky and you have a good psychotherapist, then that's still what the experience is. But so often what is kind of prescribed by mental health services or insurance companies is something that can actually pull us very far away from soul. So the story is in some way an invitation back to reclaiming psyche as the root word of soul. And another very important word that we have, a very important name, a very important character that we have, is Eros, who is the Greek god of love. You might know him as Cupid. And we can see how Eros then lends itself to the erotic. But when we think of Eros and the origin of that name of that god, it's not only what's kind of taboo or sexual or pornographic or like on that kind of end of the spectrum of pleasure or the erotic, but it's being able to taste and devour and flavor all of life. So Eros, we can kind of, I imagine Eros, the god, he has these great golden wings. So opening this word Eros back up to the full breadth of its wingspan, it's not only what's tintillating, but it's really being able to feel and, yeah, drink in the richness of life. And we have Eros's mother in the story as well, who is the great goddess of beauty and love, Aphrodite. And in the name Aphrodite, we have the Aphros, which is what Aphrodite is born from. She's born from the foaming sea foam, and she emerges from the waters. And of course, we have Botticelli's image of Venus. Venus and Aphrodite are one and the same. Venus is simply the Roman name for Aphrodite. But we'll be honoring the Greek origins of this myth, this old myth, which was first written down as what's considered by many to be the first ever novel, The Golden Ass, which is also a great name to drop in at the beginning of a summit on pleasure. We're drawing from the original novel, The Golden Ass. So that's the first time it's written down, but of course it would have been being told for centuries before that first writing down, I think in the 2nd century AD, but I will tell your listeners now that I am not so great on the facts and the details, and that's not the approach with which we're reanimating the story today. But still, an image of a golden ass is a fun one to start with. And as you listen, and as your listeners listen, and as I listen to this story, as it kind of comes back to me, what I really invite is to listen from your cells and to listen from your skin and to listen from the rippling aliveness that's within body, so that, yeah, the part of mind that might want to jump out and correct any details gets to sit back, and you rather just get to drink in the parts of the story which are alive for you. And you know, they change and they shift, and they change and they shift for me all the time. So it's always a wonderful delight to see which parts of me are most animated when I tell these stories. But from that kind of listening from skin, maybe you even bring your hands to your body to bring skin to skin, and you might gently anoint the names of those 3 characters, these words which have such charge. You could anoint your skin in the word psyche, and you could anoint your skin in the word eros, and you could anoint your skin in the word, the energy, the great power, Aphrodite. Because this story begins at a time when the altars to Aphrodite had fallen into disarray, and where the wreaths of flowers which were once laid day upon her altars had withered and shriveled and blown away with the winds, and where the sacrifices made had long since rotted, and where the dust was settling heavy and thick on the temples, on the steps, on the pillars of those temples to Aphrodite, and all that she brought into the world. And perhaps you even feel a flicker of grief in the recognition of the ways that even now, still, we neglect these temples to Aphrodite, to love, to pleasure, and to beauty. But in this story, there is a reason why the altars of Aphrodite had been abandoned. And the cause of this abandonment was a human. It was a human named Psyche, who was a young princess born in a long since forgotten kingdom, the daughter of a great king and queen, and the youngest daughter of a great king and queen. She had two older sisters who were also incredibly gorgeous beings. But it was Psyche's beauty that encouraged all of the worshippers of Aphrodite to turn away from the goddess and to begin to follow and obsess over and to wish to devour Psyche. And so first it was the worshippers in that single kingdom that walked away from Aphrodite's temples, but with time, word of this human's great beauty spread from beyond the confines of that kingdom, and more of these devotees of Aphrodite began to make their way on pilgrimage to Psyche's family's palace to come and lay their wreaths at the gates to that castle. And it is said that Psyche's beautiful was such that human speech was incapable of actually speaking directly to it. She couldn't be described. Her beauty couldn't be it couldn't be confined with the limits of language or shaped into dictones and sentences, single words. She could only be seen and have her beauty drunk in, which is why anytime anyone tried to speak of this beauty, the only way to experience it would be to make this pilgrimage to come and see her. But Psyche didn't care for her beauty so much. In fact, it kept her very estranged from her own family. Her two older sisters did not take kindly to their younger sister being put on this ridiculous pedestal and to have another wreath of flowers for Psyche, another offering to Psyche, another bunch of idiotic idolaters coming to offer Psyche their hearts. And it also caused the king and queen no end of worry, because although all of the worshippers walked to see Psyche, none of them were interested in speaking to her or in meeting her, and certainly not interested in marrying her. They just wanted to come and look at her. And so Psyche actually became more and more isolated in this palace from the world and from her family, and in many ways from herself. Because how could she reconcile this vision of herself that had traveled so far across the lands with her own experience of being a complicated, shy, a simple human? But it was this simple young human who, when word spread all the way up to the top of Mount Olympus, that this simple young human had caused all of the worshippers to desert the cult of Aphrodite, when word of this reached Aphrodite herself, she was enraged. And the force of power and of wrath of this great goddess Aphrodite, said by many to be the greatest, the most powerful of all the gods, when all of her envy was turned towards this single simple human, that was a force to be reckoned with. And Aphrodite, in her fury, began wringing her hands and asking to herself, what could be done? What could be done? What could be done? She would not stand for this desertion of her temples. And she knew what was at stake if the humans truly stopped worshipping the gods. And so she knew that something must be done. And she called on her son, Eros, the god of love, who in fact all the other gods feared. And if you've ever been stung by one of Eros's arrows, perhaps you understand why the gods feared him so. Because Eros's arrows, when they prick even a scratch on the skin of a being, we are flooded with such all-encompassing love that we can go mad. And with that great love, there can come great agony. And so being pierced by one of these arrows of Eros is an invitation to truly feel, yes, the ecstasy of love, but also the agony of love when it's not returned, it's not reciprocated, or when it leaves us, or it wanders far away, or it descends down into the underworld. We are left bereft, as the temples of Aphrodite stood bereft. Aphrodite knew she could make good use of this great power of her sons, and she began to devise a little plan, because, what would happen if all of these hundreds of worshippers saw Psyche ridiculed? This could work. This could work. How could she make such a fool of Psyche that this spell of her beauty would be broken? And finally, everyone would wander away from that palace and make their way back to her own temples. And Aphrodite began to imagine what would be the most hilarious way that she could mock Psyche by having her fall in love with maybe the village idiot. Yes, that would be funny. Or maybe she could fall in love with, she could fall in love with, she would have Eros make Psyche fall in love with a pig. And Aphrodite laughed up at the top of Mount Olympus as she imagined how silly, how foolish Psyche would look when she emerged from the castle holding a pig and telling the whole world that this was her beloved, her betrothed, her chosen husband. And so Aphrodite called Eros and said, Eros, my son, I have a task for you to do. You must go to the castle where the princess Psyche resides, and on your way, pick up a neighboring pig, but not just any big pig, the biggest pot-bellied pig that you can find, and carry the pig to Psyche's palace, put it in her bedchamber, and prick her with one of your arrows so that when she awakes, she sees the pig and she falls madly in love with him, and all of this nonsense will be finally over. And Eros has no problem causing trouble. In fact, it's one of his favorite things to do. And so he says, okay, mother, off I go. And off he flies. He flaps his great vast golden wings and he careens off into the night and on his way to Psyche's palace. And yeah, on his way, he sees the biggest, the fattest, the most ridiculous pig that he can find and scoops it up, makes his way to Psyche's bedchamber, and before he kind of gets in, he pushes the pig through the window, and then he pushes the glass pane further open, and he sees Psyche lying in the bed. Can't quite make out her face, but he can see her tousled dark hair kind of cascading out of the bed sheets, and he can hear the slumber in her breath. And he reaches behind and draws an arrow from his quiver, and he pulls it to his bow and he pulls it back. And just in that moment, a cloud moves past the moon, and the moonlight shines on Psyche's face, and he sees the radiance in her face, and something happens which has never happened before. And Eros hesitates before he pulls back his bow and fires that arrow. And in that moment of hesitation, the unthinkable happens, and he drops the arrow and it just grazes his thigh, and it just pierces into his skin, so that Eros, the god of love, is finally pierced with the agony and the ecstasy of one of his own arrows. And as he sees Psyche lying there, he is overcome with lust and burning desire and deep reverie, besotted as he instantly becomes with this sleeping human. And Eros is so in love with Psyche that it doesn't even cross his mind that the simplest thing to do would be to simply pick up another arrow and fire it at her, wake her up so that she awakens and sees him and falls just as in love with him. And how simple that would have been. But Eros is so deeply in love with her that it doesn't even cross his mind that he would try to trick or that he would try to manipulate his great power in this way. And so he just looks at her and he drinks her in and he drinks her in and he drinks her in, so that Psyche becomes impressed upon Eros's soul. And he watches her and he imagines what she might be dreaming there in her simple human brain, her simple human dreaming body. And then he knows that he must leave. And he begins to hear the slumber in her breath begin to dissipate as she starts to come back. She starts to be reanimated back to waking life. And he takes a last look at her, drinks her in a last time, and he spreads his wings, and then he flaps out of the window and into the wakening dawn and away from her palace. As Psyche yawns, and pulls her hair out, and stretches into the day, looks around the room where she sees a pig. She thinks, what on earth is this pig doing in my room? And so she assumes that she must still be dreaming, and she nods back asleep. And I'm going to pause there. Yeah. Just to see if there's anything kind of awakening in you that feels very alive or potent or really relevant to what it is that you want to honor with this opening of the doors to your pleasure temple that is this summit.
You know, the thing that really struck me was both the description of that people wanting to avoid Eros for wanting to avoid that intense experience, both of love and agony. And then when he nicks his own leg, that really speaks to how I have come to understand what pleasure is, which is the experience of deep emotion. Like it's a fullness of experience of connectedness and emotion. And it's not about just the good emotions or the good experiences. It really is a spectrum of, joy, delight, thrill, wonder, agony. I loved that word agony has a feeling tone to it that is, it's just it interests me. Yeah, it really caught me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's fascinating and confusing to our minds that want to rationalize and make sense and make things right or wrong in black and white. But within one of the traditions of Greek myths, and this is certainly the one that I'm most interested in, Aphrodite is Eros's mother, but his father is Ares, the god of war, which we might also know as Mars. So Mars and Venus, Aphrodite and Ares are in an adulterous relationship. And I'm always fascinated by what does the goddess of beauty see in the god of war? And she's madly in love with him, and it's their union that births Eros. So when we even then have the god of love, which has this capacity for agony and ecstasy, so remember that not only is his mother, tumbling honey locks and soft plump skin and so much pleasure, but that his father is the god of war. And how can we reconcile these complicated aspects of human nature, which of course Greek myth invites us to always unwrap them and to take them out of the box and to stop trying to understand and to just know that there's no right or wrong in these stories. And if we try to kind of drink them in from that way, however tempting it may be, when we're used to having stories repackaged for us in a certain way, he is the son of the god of war as much as he is the son of the goddess of beauty and love. So maybe this can also help us to understand why this spectrum of pleasure, it's, if we just stay obsessed with one side, then we negate we negate so much of the rest of it? And is it even possible to be dancing up and down this end of the ecstasy if we're not also able to traverse down into the realm of what's agonizing and what's painful? And I really feel that prick that prick in his godly divine thigh, this tiny wound from that arrow, which actually opens Eros up to so much more of feeling, but also so much more of his story. He then gets to have his own epic story, which is the one that we're honoring.
Yeah, I really love that.
So let's find our way back into that story. And later that same morning, after Psyche kind of went dozing back off to sleep after seeing the pig, when she did finally awaken and get up, she went down to the palace balconies, and she sees that these pilgrims, the pilgrims of Psyche, have swollen even more in number, and so that there's a kind of great crushing of them at the gates. And it's really scary, actually, for Psyche. It's really scary. What do all of these men, women, beings want from her? What could they possibly want from her? All she would want is to have conversation, is to have connection, is to have someone who could actually reach out and touch her, not only see her and want to drink her in from afar, but where's the intimacy? Psyche is kind of bereft of intimacy and feels this great longing for someone to be interested in her beyond what it is that she looks like. So she's overwhelmed with these swelling swarms of worshippers. And her father is also just racking his head. By this time, both of her sisters have actually married. It turns out that some of these worshippers who have kind of set up camp outside the palace, they've got no problem marrying Psyche's sisters and kind of coming into relationship with these slightly lesser examples of beauty and radiance. So her father's not worried about the sisters. The sisters have now gone off to their own homes and they're married, but Psyche still remains unattached with no one, all of these worshippers, and yet none of them are kind of suitors coming to ask for Psyche's hands. And the king is starting to get really worried, actually. And back in these times, if anyone, but particularly a king, particularly someone of power, started to get worried, then they might start to think, oh gods, oh gods, oh gods, how have I offended you? How have I offended you? And so the king knows where he can go to ask for support. And the king and queen make their own pilgrimage to the temple of Delphi. And they go to the god Apollo and they say, oh, great Apollo, what must we do? How can we see our youngest daughter Psyche finally wed, finally happily wed? What can we do? We ask of you, oh Apollo. And I'm going to read Apollo's response because I wouldn't want to take the great god's words in vain. And so Apollo says, on some high mountain's craggy summit place, the virgin, decked for deadly nuptial rites, nor hope a son-in-law of mortal birth, but a dire mischief, viperous and fierce, who flies through ether and with fire and sword, tires and deliberates all things that are. Terrific to the powers that reign on high, great Zeus himself fears this winged pest, and streams and Stygian shades his power abhor. And the king, who before had been exhausted and so worried about what might happen to Psyche if no one would marry her, now his heart sinks even lower and his heart breaks even more as he hears these words of Apollo, which, if we unwrap them a little, Apollo is basically decreeing that Psyche must marry a beast. He calls him viperous, so this kind of snake-like beast with these. He flies a winged pest, who even Zeus himself fears this great beast. And so the king and the queen come back from Delphi, back to the palace, in just floods of tears. They don't want to have to let their daughter go, but Apollo has decreed that not only will she marry this beast, but that they must take her up to the top of a mountain, dressed in funeral rites, and leave her there for this beast to come and claim her. And these, of course, are times when you don't ignore the word of the Oracle of Delphi. You don't ignore the will of the gods. And so the king and queen know that they have no choice but to dress Psyche in her funeral attire and to march her up with the funeral rites all the way to the top of this mountain and leave her there to face her fate, to wait for this beast to come and claim her. And so this procession begins. They dress Psyche in her funeral attire, and the royal party, the king and the queen and the two sisters, they begin to ascend up the top of this mountain with Psyche following behind them. And they're all howling with grief that they have to do this terrible thing and leave Psyche to this terrible fate. But as they leave her there, she stops them and says, I would have you save your tears now. You should have begun grieving when the worshippers turned from Aphrodite and towards me, because this is when the great grief came into the world and into my life. This is where my fate began to take a turn for the monstrous. It's not now, when it's too late, that you should be mourning. You should have mourned what happened then. And so, ashamed, her family turned from her, knowing there is nothing else to do, so that they don't even look back as they descend down the mountain and leave Psyche to wait for her fate, for this beast to come and claim her. And Psyche sits at the top of this mountain, and there's a harsh wind that cuts into her skin, and her hair blisters above her in a great mass of clouds. And as she waits, the sky begins to turn from blue to pink, to a midnight blue, as the stars begin to sparkle into the sky and night falls upon the mountaintop. And still Psyche waits her fate. And in some ways she's resigned to it. In some ways she's resigned to this fate. What kind of a life was she living in the palace anyway? Perhaps this beast would actually have an interest in her other than her beauty. And so she's almost ready. She's almost ready when the wind blows even stronger, a wind that howls in from the west. The western wind, which the Greeks called Zephyrus, blows in, and it begins to lift Psyche's bones off of the rocks of the mountain. And Zephyrus takes Psyche in his arms, and he blows her all the way down through the valleys, all the way past vast forests, until they come to a clearing where Zephyrus drops Psyche gently down on the floor and blows away, so that Psyche is left in this still clearing where the air is fresh and fragrant with flowers. And Psyche sees in the moonlit night a glimmering white palace before her. And this palace is magnetic, and she feels herself being drawn towards its great doors, which are carved with intricate designs telling rich stories of the gods, of the great heroes of her people, and which are covered in different rubies and diamonds and emeralds. And Psyche, without even knowing that she's doing it, she reaches her hand forward and she pushes the door, and the door gives way, as if she's pushing through air, and she feels herself so invited to step into this palace, which, as she steps in to these great cavernous halls, which are glittering with marble and dusted with gold, and she just looks around herself in bewildered wonder. Where is she? Could this be the home of this monstrous beast, this husband who had been promised her by Apollo? Because this didn't seem so very bad. It's like he walks through the halls of the palace of the imaginal, and more just extraordinary delights leap out at her from the paintings on the walls and the details on the vases. And there's music playing in the palace as well, and it's the most delightful music that Psyche has ever heard, and it's tinkling, but she can't see anyone playing the music, but it's just filling the halls, and it's filling Psyche's body, this delicate music that shimmers into herself. And as she's listening to this music, she begins to hear a voice also dance into the tune. And the voice says, Psyche, welcome to my palace, where you shall be my queen. Welcome to your home, my beloved. Explore at your will. Your new handmaidens shall attend to you until you are ready to meet with me, your husband. And Psyche is, she's shook. She's shook as she hears this voice, and she doesn't know if she's terrified or if she's delighted. She's just so alive with sensation that it's actually beyond description or beyond naming what this sensation is, as she hears this voice. And these attendants come and begin to stroke Psyche's skin, but she can't see them. She can't see them, but she can feel the touch of these attendants as they pull off the funeral attire that Psyche had been left to wait at the top of the mountain in, and they pull these silken robes over her, and they brush her hair, and they anoint her with sweet perfumes, and they pull her through the palace to a huge bathtub, which they invite Psyche to step into, and they pour different oils and they massage her skin. And Psyche's just swimming on this cloud of delightedness, of ecstasy. And she's just feeling herself so much allure that she doesn't really question what's happening. And with time, the attendants pull her out of the bath and they bring her to a bedchamber. And this bedchamber has great swooping crimson canopies and has a great golden bed in the center of it. And the attendants usher Psyche towards the bed, where they pull off her bathrobe so that she's naked in her own skin, in her own being. And Psyche slips into the bed. And she lets herself drop into its soft embrace. And she hears a soft whisper again. Psyche, my love, welcome. And she hears that this voice is now next to her in the bed, but she can't see anyone or anything next to her. But this voice is yet so alive, it's so tangible, but there's nothing that she can see with her waking eyes. And so she reaches her hands out towards where she hears this voice coming from. She reaches towards where the voice is coming from, and then she pulls back as she suddenly meets flesh and muscle. And with trepidation, she reaches just the tips of her fingertips out again until they caress that same skin. And it is, the softest, most buttery skin she's ever touched. And she runs her fingertips down a rippling forearm. And she runs her fingertips over a veined wrist. And she runs her fingertip into an open, vast palm. which wraps its fingers around Psyche's hands and pulls her closer towards him, towards this body, this being, which of course is the god Eros, who has welcomed Psyche into his palace, into his bed, and into his heart. And he draws her close, and all of that magnetic power of Eros is emanating from him. And Psyche's kind of drunk on his intoxifying aroma as he pulls his fingers through her hair and over her skin and over her naked breasts and down her belly. And he brings both hands around her waist and pulls her closer and closer unto him until they become one. And in this embrace, this first embrace of Psyche and Eros, they become husband and wife, just as Apollo had decreed. For this, of course, is the monster which is feared by so many gods, not least Zeus himself, who has been pricked by the arrow of Eros many a times, perhaps pricked more times than any other being on earth. So this is what Apollo meant when he said that even Zeus feared this beast. But as Psyche's there in his arms, she can't find anything beastly about him at all. She can only find things that are delighting about him. And she falls asleep in his arms. And Eros is just so enraptured to have this being, this human here in his arms, in his home. And yeah, what could possibly go wrong now that they're here together? But when Psyche awakens in the morning, Eros is gone. And she looks around the room and it looks just as beautiful as it did the night before, but there's something now more unsettling, because where is she? What happened the night before? She's no longer a virgin, no longer a maiden. She's no longer simply Psyche. She's married to this entity, but what is she wed herself to? What is she bound herself to? And all of the kind of exquisite rapture that she felt the night before begins to drip away, and Psyche feels afraid. Psyche feels afraid, and she wanders through the palace of the imaginal, seeing more and more of its magnificent delights, but feeling somewhat lost and alone and small and insignificant within its walls. But then at night, Eros returns. And again, Psyche, immediately all of those doubts, all of those fears melt from her mind, and she's back in his arms, back in his embrace, and they're making love once again, and all is right with the world. And things continue like this for some time. Eros disappearing in the morning, and Psyche wandering through the palace, wondering what's happening. And then night comes again, and she stops doubting, and she's in full trust. She's in full love with whatever this being may be. Does she need to see him? Does she need to know? Does she need to understand? Or is this pleasure enough? And every night she thinks, yes, it's enough. And every morning she thinks, no, it's not enough. But with the passage of time, she begins to find something of a normality between the two. And she finds that she can be in the company of this invisible husband. Psyche has no idea of who he truly is, but she finds some kind of companionship with him. He does like to talk to her. He does want to touch her. He does want to be in relationship with her in this way, which she's never experienced before. And she finds some comfort in that. And it's that when they spend time together, they're not always in the throes of lovemaking and pleasure, but Eros begins to take her around the palace grounds at night and to show her more and more different corners of its majestic, awe-inspiring architecture and design. And Psyche begins to feel more at home here. And it's one of these nights when Eros has been walking Psyche through the grounds that he's just looking at her, and he's as madly in love with her as he was the first time that he looked up from that prick in his thigh and saw her for the very first time. He's just as absolutely besotted with her. But he's also beginning to feel like surely there could be more than this, endless slog of, needing to disappear back to Olympus every day and then only being able to sneak away at night because, of course, he hasn't told his mother what's going on. He's not told his mother that he's carried away this human that Aphrodite so despises. He's got this kind of secret love affair going on, and he's kept it secret from all the gods. So this is why he has to go back to Olympus every morning, can only slip away again at night. But he's thinking, I would love it if I could bring her to Olympus, and that we could really, truly stand there together as husband and wife. And I would love it if she could see me, because what if Psyche could see me? Maybe she would love me as I love her. And he hears a voice in his head going, come on, Eros, you're the god of love yourself. Like, of course, if she sees you, she's going to fall madly in love with you. Like, don't worry, like, have her see you, have her fall in love with you, and then you can really, get all of your cards out on the table. You can tell her everything that's been going on. You can come clean, and you can take her to meet your mother. She can apologize, all will be well, and perhaps you can both go and reside forever on Mount Olympus. But there's another voice in Eros's head, which is like, oh God, oh gods. But what if she sees me and she doesn't fall in love with me? What if she sees me and she's terrified? What if I'm too much for her? Oh. And so he thinks, okay, I'll trust Psyche. I'll give her a choice. So Eros says to Psyche, you could ask me anything. You could ask anything of me in the whole world, and I would grant it to you. And he's thinking, she's definitely going to ask to see me. Like, she must be so confused. She's definitely going to ask to see me. And so he's kind of waiting. Anything you want, Psyche. I could show you anything you want. And Psyche sighs. She says, well, there is one thing. There is one thing that I would love to see. I would love to see my sisters again. And Eros is aghast. Like, what? You want to see what? But he's promised her. He's promised her that he would show her, give her whatever she asks for. And Psyche says, I know that they weren't always kind to me, but they're my sisters, and I want them to know that I'm okay. I want them to know that this beast that Apollo decried is not as terrifying as everyone thought that it would be, that I'm okay. And maybe they'd be happy for me when they see, how I'm living and what the palace is like. Please, I would have you bring them to me. And Eros says, I promised you I would give you what you asked for, but you must promise me something in return. You must promise me not to tell your sisters anything about me. You must tell them nothing of me. Even as they ask, even as they press you for details, don't tell them that I am or am not like the beast that everyone imagined. Say nothing of me at all. You must promise me this, Psyche. You must trust me. Tell them nothing of me, for they will seek to twist your words and to turn your heart against me. And Psyche outwardly smiles and agrees, but inwardly she scoffs, because what on earth could she possibly tell them? She doesn't even know what he looks like. She doesn't even know who he is. What does he think that she's going to let slip? But she doesn't say this. She just swallows that down and agrees. She agrees to say nothing of her invisible, mysterious husband to her sisters. And so Eros sends Zephyrus, the western wind, to go and carry Psyche's sisters from their respective homes to the palace of the Imaginal, where they arrive the next morning. And when the sisters arrive in that clearing on the woods and they see the palace for the first time, they are both filled with fury. They had been sad to say goodbye to Psyche. A little bit of them had been pleased. It meant that they finally were the two most beautiful beings in the kingdom. And if Psyche was destined to be with a beast, then so be it. What could they do to stop such a nightmarish outcome? And so when they'd walked down that mountain, they'd secretly smiled at one another and thought, good riddance. But now they saw where she was living. All the jealousy that they'd ever reserved for Psyche flooded up to the surface of their beings, and they were enraged. But they walked forward and they knocked on the vast wooden door. And as Psyche came and answered the door to them, they both beamed to match her delighted smile. Psyche, our dearest youngest sister. Oh, what a pleasure it is to see you again. And Psyche hugs her sisters, and she's genuinely delighted to see them again. And she's so proud to get to welcome them into the Palace of the Imaginal and to show them around and to show them the different ruby encrusted chairs and tables and to show them the feasts that are laid on day after day after day, and to let her sisters gorge and to fill their bellies with the most delicious Dionysian wine that Eros orders, once a month on delivery to the palace. And the sisters smile and simper and laugh along with Psyche, but inside they are seething. And eventually they come to it. They say, so Psyche, we thought we'd be meeting your husband here. Where is this husband that Apollo prophesied? We surely would love to see him, to see, is he as terrifying as we all thought he would be? And Psyche says, oh, he's not here. He's not here. And the sisters go, oh, he didn't wish to meet with your family. Oh, that's a shame, Psyche. Well, you must have a picture of him. Psyche says, oh, no, he's very unvain. We don't have any pictures of him in the house. And the sisters both catch a glint of one another's eye. This sounds suspicious. Well, Psyche, why don't you describe him to us? And Psyche says, well, he's young and handsome, and he has a flaxen beard, and he's a great hunter. And yes, I'm sure you'd be very well pleased with him if you were to meet him, when you will meet him one day. And Psyche's kind of stumbling over her words, and the sisters press her more. Well, what does he do, Psyche? Is he known in our kingdom? He must be a prince or a king to live in a palace such as this. And Psyche's going, oh, no, I don't think he has a title. You don't think he has a title? Well, what's his profession then? Oh, he has no title. And Psyche's kind of getting herself more and more into this trap as the sisters become more and more sure something is up here. This isn't just the palace of a king. This is a palace of a god. And the sisters are not best pleased with this at all. And so they push Psyche more and more, and they keep pushing and they keep pushing and they keep pushing. And they say, Psyche, it seems that you don't know what this husband is like at all. Psyche, do you even know his name? And Psyche is full now of anxiety and fear. Psyche, have you even seen him? And Psyche, she kind of feels this, everything that she's been desperately trying to hold in and hold together the whole time she's been in the Palace of the Imaginal. It's beginning to erupt to the surface. All of her fears, all of her doubts, all of her discomfort about why it is that her husband disappears every day, why it is that she can't see him. And this builds more and more to the surface, and it crescendos until it cracks. And finally, Psyche sobs and she says, oh, sisters, I'm so ashamed. I let him come and take me every night, and I enjoy it. But in the morning, he's gone. And you're right, I don't know what he looks like. And you're right, I don't know his name. And so you're right, I don't know who it is that has taken my maidenhood. And I don't know who it is whose home I live in. And I don't know who it is that took me from the top of the mountain. Sisters, what should I do? And Psyche feels kind of relieved that her sisters are finally, showing her so much love and concern. And she's thinking, okay, well, I can trust my sisters, and I can trust my sisters. And they say, Psyche, there is one way that you can put a stop to this. You must see this beast in his full form once and for all. So tonight, when he comes to visit you, take a knife from the kitchen so that you can see his reflection in the blade, and take an oil lamp and go to him and finally lay your eyes upon him. And before he awakens and seizes you with his beastly claws, you must draw your sword through his neck and put an end to this barbaric existence that you have been lost in. And And I'm pausing again. I'm pausing again because there's something in the story here that I think is kind of worth uh, exploring, because I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know, but there's something here about trust and distrust.
Mm.
And when we do trust or we don't trust, the kind of instinctual expression or feeling of pleasure. And Psyche's been in this kind of dance for a while of like trusting, like, this feels so good. This feels so good. How could it be wrong? As well as then that voice of doubt creeping back in and going, what's going on? What's going on? Like, is it enough? Is it enough to trust? Is it enough to trust how good this feels? So this kind of maybe rational or maybe protective mind stepping in. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just kind of curious about what you
Mm.
think about this balance of when we just trust what feels good versus when we invite in discernment.
Oh, it's so what I noticed even before we got there was the funeral clothes and the contrast to that image to the castle. So there's
Mm,
this dark and the light, and then the trust in the night and the distrust in the day. Like that's what I'm kind of getting at,
mm,
those two things connected. And so much of what I've been discussing with people about pleasure is so much of what has disconnected us from just inherently trusting pleasure and things that are pleasurable is like the seed. And it's so I'm really struck by how cruel the sisters are and the stepsisters are. Like it's like, oh, it's quite vicious almost, the prodding and the pushing and the which is sort of for me bringing the distrust, the skepticism, it's really, and the way you're describing the push pull kind of the trust and the distrust. But it's how cut off we are from the trust, from the being in that at that darkness, that dark time. And then this incessant need to shine the light on everything all the time, to prod, and that's what I'm noticing.
mm. I've not thought about that before as well, actually. Just even the night is where there's trust and the daytime is where the confusion comes in. And that's such a beautiful, yeah, truth about, yeah, nighttime all makes sense. And she descends in a way into dream, into it's the palace of the imaginal, right? And it's nighttime when she can really be in the fullness of what the palace of the imaginal holds, this palace of Eros, when there's then this kind of completeness with him being there, and she can just be fully off in the pleasures, the delights of the imaginal realm. Though, of course, the imaginal realm isn't only delighting, but
Mm.
yeah, that
Mm.
trust in the night versus the clarity of day being what actually brings the sense of distrust. And yeah, it's a beautiful reflection from the story, which I've not seen before, simply in the like, could we trust in dream, could we trust in what's not real uh more than we trust in what is real or what is known or what is out there in the cold light of day, uh which
Yeah,
feels
and mm,
mm, you
mm.
go.
Well, I was just going to say, and that it's that tension holding, isn't it? It's like inherently, even as you were speaking about, almost the intoxication of the nighttime pleasures and I mean, even intoxication has an insinuation that it's not a good thing.
Mm,
And you kind of get a sense that the opposites exist for perhaps for a reason, to not get lost in one, to not get cut off in the other.
mm,
And I think that's a really interesting thing that has come up in different ways in the discussion around pleasure, because there is like a danger associated with that we won't be able to get out of the darkness if we go too deeply into the pleasure.
Mm.
And I'm kind of curious, just that's what it's making me think about.
Yeah, and for me, the sisters, which yeah is so brutal. They're like playing on Psyche's longing to belong and to be in family, and being able to kind of twist that, and me reflecting like, yeah, there's the ways that the world does that to us. So yeah, the external forces that are going to come in and prod that distrust, but also the internal forces which make us distrust. And there's something as you're speaking that I'm like, that internal voice is so easy to listen to when it's asking us to trust what's painful, like the
Mm.
what's the to distrust the agonizing bit of pleasure, because it's also a part of it, right? Like in that whole spectrum of feeling, we yeah, it's it's feeling, whether it's good or bad, but how easy that voice is to listen to when it's like, that doesn't feel good, so get rid of it. And
Yes.
that's how they convince her.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Mm.
Mm. And they do convince her.
Mm.
And so that night, when Eros has come back to the palace, Psyche doesn't immediately go to him in bed. She waits, and she goes and she takes the blade and she takes the oil lamp and she creeps up to their bedchamber, where she sees the form of her husband, sleeping. And she, like he, many moons before, had the breath of sleep and dream. She hears this in him, and so she knows that he's asleep, even though she can't see him. And she creeps towards him, and she very gently pulls the satin sheets away from his form, and she brings the blade close to the light of the oil lamp, and she sees reflected in it the most beautiful being she's ever beheld. And as soon as Psyche's seen Eros in that reflection in the knife, she can turn to him and she can see him fully. And so she sees his raven tendrils that just softly caress his high cheekbones. And she sees his rosebud lips. And she sees his bulging arms. And she sees all of the soft beauty even as he sleeps, and she feels all of his strength and magnetism even as he sleeps, and she's just enraptured. She's enraptured by him, and she can't help herself but to begin to climb on top of him and to begin covering him in smothering kisses. This man, this being, this god who she knows instinctively can only be Eros. Nothing else in the whole world could be as beautiful as this being, as her husband, than the god Eros. And she's kissing him and she's saying, Eros, Eros, Eros. But she's kind of whipping herself up into a frenzy. She's still holding the oil lamp, and the oil drips from the lamp and it drops onto Eros's shoulder. And he awakens with a sudden great shriek. And he throws the Psyche off of him, and he knows instantly that she's betrayed him. He knows instantly that she listened to her sisters, to those voices of doubt that Psyche let poison her mind so that she would distrust all of the pleasure, the whole spectrum of pleasure that Eros had been inviting Psyche into. And he is enraged. And remember, Eros is the son of the god of war. And when he's enraged, boy, is he angry. And he's furious with Psyche. And he says, how dare you? How dare you distrust me? How dare you go against my word? And with nothing else said, he flings himself out of the window, and his great golden wings shake off into the night as he howls in agony as he flies away. This burn on his shoulder has filled Eros with agony, though perhaps the true agony is not from the wound of the oil lamp, but from the wound of his beloved not trusting him. And he goes, and Psyche's kind of stood in the bedchamber just aghast, like all that she'd gained in that moment, all of the clarity, the miracle that her husband was none other than the god Eros, everything that she gained in that moment, all of the love, all of the passion and delight that she felt for Eros suddenly also ripped from her as he disappeared into that vast night. And Psyche steps back, and as she steps back, the marble floor begins to crack beneath her heel, and it splinters through the floor, and it makes its way up into the walls, which also begin to crack as the great pillars that hold the palace of the imaginal together began to crick and crumble and dissolve as the palace crumbles and it crumbles and it crumbles, and Psyche tumbles through the destruction of this palace, and she kind of falls, and she finds herself suddenly landing in thick bracken and brambles, and her skin is torn and her hair ragged as she lands in this dark, dark forest that is full of decay. The palace of the imaginal utterly disappeared, and her left in this dark forest, which she looks around in, and the whole forest is moving with aliveness. There's snakes that are slithering through the undergrowth and up into the branches of the trees, and there's great bugs and creepy crawlies that are hurrying this way and that, and every inch of the floor is covered in great vast ants, and there's just all of this like fiendish aliveness surrounding Psyche, and she can't believe how much everything has shifted from one moment to the next. This palace, this pristine palace where everything was safe and the walls were so solid and she was so held in this white gleaming marble home, now alone in this cold, dark forest where all of these bugs are even starting to itch across her skin. And she doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know what to do. And she kind of falls into despair. And she feels the putrid smell of the leaves of the forest floor, the leaves of the seasons and the seasons and the seasons past, of the dropped, shedded leaves that have composted into the forest floor. And Psyche thinks, what is there to do but for me to sit here and to decompose into the forest myself? All is lost, all is lost. And she lets her despair kind of drop into the thick, slick decay of the forest floor. And she stays there. She stays there for some time. Until there's a crack on the bracken and a hoof steps its way through the forest floor. Another hoof, as this creature begins to approach Psyche. And Psyche is barely aware that there's this being moving towards her until it's right in front of her, and she sees the hooves and her eyes kind of open. She comes back to her awareness a little bit, and she looks up, and she looks past these huge, great goat legs and a rippling, hairy human torso with big, vast arms, and then a head that is half human and half goat with some horns protruding out the top of it, and a beard that's full of moss and brambles. And perhaps the listeners recognize this being as Psyche recognizes him. And of course, it is the god Pan. The god Pan. And he looks puzzled at Psyche and he says, "Human, what are you doing lying here in the soil of the forest of soul?" And Psyche says, "There's nothing else for me to do. but to stay here in the decay. And Pan can discern very easily that this is a human who is heartbroken. And yeah, Pan is beloved by all. And so he mourns greatly when he sees someone who has lost their love. And so he says, woman, anyone who has lost love, there's really only one place to turn to if you wish to win your love back. And Psyche looks at Pan and a bit of aliveness comes back into her eyes. And she says, what? What can I do? All I would wish for, all I would long for is to have my love returned to me. And Pan says, well, it's obvious. You must turn to the god Eros if you wish to find your love again. And his mother, Aphrodite. Between them, they will help you find your way back to love. And Psyche, of course, it's like a blade cutting her when she even hears his name. Pan telling her the only way back to her love is through her love himself, and she can't make sense of it. She can't make sense of it. And so she says, how would I find Eros? And Pan says, well, the first place to look would be in his mother's temple. Go to his mother's temple and look for the signs of Eros and see if you can make your way to him so that he may help you make your way back to love. And with that, Pan bids her adieu and he pulls out his panpipes and plays a merry tune as he makes his way back through the forest. Psyche calls after him, how do I find my way to Aphrodite's temple? And Pan says, follow the river. It will take you to the goddesses. And Psyche kind of gets up and she begins to stumble through this forest, which is just perpetually nighttime. And there's a little worm in the forest that she just gets to see a pink glimmer of color in this dark forest. And the worm just gently nods his head in one direction. And that's enough for Psyche. She heads in the direction that the worm showed her. And as she heads in that direction, sure enough, with time, she comes to a great big black river with muddy banks and quite the smell. And she looks over the edge of the river and she sees a face in the water. And she looks at the face and thinks, I know that face. I know that face. And it takes her a few moments to realize that, of course, it's her own reflection. But so changed has she been already since she was thrown out of the palace of the Imaginal. And Psyche can see that despair and grief and heartbreak are beginning to creep into her once glowing skin. She kind of brings her hand to her face and she touches that grief. And she knows that it's nothing more than a sign of love, but it's a testament to her love. And so she wears her grief with pride. And she says to the river, will you take me and my grief and will you carry me to the temples of the goddesses? And the river stirs and ripples and Psyche knows that that's a yes. And so she descends into the river whose currents carry her out of this forest of soul, and they wash her up upon the banks of a far distant land where Psyche pulls herself out of the river and looks around. She sees nothing. She sees nothing. And she doesn't know what to do other than to start walking in a direction. So she just chooses a direction and she walks into it. And she walks and she walks and she walks until eventually, with time, she sees ahead of her a temple. And she thinks, oh, gods, finally, finally, a temple. I can ask for the support of Aphrodite. Bring me back to Eros. And she goes into the temple and she looks around and she sees that this temple has many bulls and cows carved into it. And there's a kind of golden hue to the rocks. But the temple is also dirty and it's been abandoned. And so Psyche thinks, okay, well, we better get to work, make the temple beautiful again, bring the goddess back to life so that I can ask for her support. And so Psyche begins to clean the stones, and she gets pails of water, and she washes the altar, and she goes out into the lands around, and she finds whatever she can gather to make offerings with. And Psyche's there busying herself with her devotional heart and bringing her longing back into the temple, until finally the goddess of that temple is stirred by these offerings and by the rememberings of Psyche. And she awakens and she descends the steps and she says, "Human, what would you ask of me?" And Psyche looks up, but it's not Aphrodite that she sees. She's greeted instead by the great goddess Hera. Hera, who is the beloved wife of Zeus, an Olympian, goddess of the sacred marriage and divine partnership. And Psyche says, "Oh, Hera, oh, great Hera, oh, Hera, I'm so delighted to see you. Please, please, I would ask for your support. I have been separated from my husband, and I know that you know this agony of being separated, husband and wife. Please, please help me find my way back to my husband Eros." And Hera thinks, "Oh, whoa, whoa." This is the human who's married Eros. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't help you. There's no way that I could go against the will of Aphrodite. This would not cause any good for yourself or any of the humans. I must remain loyal to the gods. I cannot help you. And you're lucky that I don't have you arrested, which would be the will of your mother-in-law, Aphrodite. So leave my temple and go." And Psyche moans, but she knows there's nothing to do but to leave. And so she leaves the temple of Hera and she walks again in the only direction that she knows to turn towards. And she walks and she walks and she walks in that direction through the lost lands, through her lost longing, until she sees ahead of her again another temple, and she hastens her step and she begins to run into this temple, and she enters the temple and wow, this is a powerful temple. And she looks around and she sees that there's many carvings of corn and wheat and a great box covered in adornments, and it's decorated with scythes and other objects of the harvest. And so Psyche thinks, okay, doesn't look that Aphroditean, but perhaps there's a chance, And so she begins once again to gather offerings to make at this temple. And yeah, she busies herself and her devotional heart comes back into play again. And she begins making her prayers, singing her hymns at this temple. And she sings all the hymns that she knows. And it's one hymn in particular that awakens the great goddess of this temple as Psyche sings of the story of Persephone and Hades, and she sees the pomegranates that are glistening like rubies in the walls of this temple, and down from the steps awakens and descends the great goddess Demeter, goddess of harvest, the mother of earth and the mother of Persephone. And Psyche says, "Oh, great Demeter, I know that you know more than any of the gods how it is to lose the one you love the most. I know that you know this agony year after year as Persephone descends once again down to the realm of the underworld and you await her homecoming. Demeter, I beg you, I pray you, please give me that same homecoming that you await every spring with your daughter. Give me my own spring with my husband, Eros." And Demeter, as moved as she has been throughout Psyche's prayers, she holds up her hand and says, "Eros, then I know your name, Psyche. We've all heard your story on Mount Olympus, and we heard how you betrayed Eros and how you wounded him so unkindly. He is in agony until this day with that wound, and the wrath of his mother is great and huge. And I would never betray another grieving mother. I cannot help you, Psyche. And though I won't tell Aphrodite that I have seen you here, I also cannot show you the way. Leave my temple, leave my walls. And Psyche, once again, walks out of the temple and turns towards another direction in which she heads, this time with an ever declining faith that she'll ever make her way to Aphrodite and ever make her way back to Eros. It seems that all the gods have turned against her. And so she walks and she walks and she walks and she walks, and she's so weary. She's so weary that by the time she is ready to drop, she can't even see where it is that she's wandered to, and she just falls asleep at the bottom of stone steps. And she falls into a great, weary, grief-stricken sleep. Meanwhile, where is Eros whilst Psyche's been wandering the lands, longing for him? Has he been longing for Psyche in return? We know how much he loves her. But this wound of Eros is so great that the pain of it has kind of blinded him to his love of Psyche, and all he can be in is this pain, the pain of both the wound. And when a god is wounded by a mortal object, it's a deep wound, but deeper still is that wound of betrayal. And that wound of betrayal has blinded him to the plight of Psyche, to where she may be, to his own longing to be back with her. And so he's kind of spiraling through the cosmos in agony until he eventually makes his way to his mother's palace, where she, "Oh, Eros, darling, come to your mother, come to your mother." And Aphrodite embraces him, and Eros is just kind of moaning and crying that, you know, he's in all this agony. He's been so betrayed. Why did he let this human trick him? And Aphrodite says, "Don't worry, my dear boy. You go to your old bedchamber and Mummy will take care of you. Mummy will take care of you. We don't want to see that bitch ever again. Mummy will take care of you." And Aphrodite is kind of making sure that Eros doesn't quite recall all it is that he longs for in the deeper parts of his being. And so Aphrodite has Eros in her own palace, and she's feeling smug. She's feeling very smug that not only has Psyche disappeared from the world of mortals, and the mortals have begun turning back to her temples once again, but she's also very smug that she's managed to separate Eros from this human that she despises so. And she's very pleased with herself as she wakes up one morning and stretches her great willowy limbs into the beginning of another day, and she tosses her hair behind her and wraps it up into a loose bun and drapes her blue robes over her, and she pushes open the door to her palace, and she looks out over the vast rolling valleys under Olympus, and she looks down the steps that descend away from her palace, and she sees a speck at the bottom of them. And she thinks, what is that? And so Aphrodite begins to descend the stairs of her palace, and with every step, she feels more and more fury begin to flood into her as she realizes that some human has made their way to her palace and fallen asleep pathetically at the steps. And then with every step, she begins to feel more and more recognition as she realizes who this human is at the bottom of her palace. This bitch, Psyche. This being who is the cause of so much of Aphrodite's own suffering, who caused the whole world to turn away from the cult of Aphrodite, and then who has the gumption to betray her own son, Eros. How dare this human of all humans crawl her way, creeping and snarling to Aphrodite's palace? And Aphrodite claps her hands and calls her servants to her and says, "Drag her inside." And the servant pulls her hair into Psyche's tangled mane, and she drags Psyche up the steps and throws her on the floor of the chamber of Aphrodite's palace. And Psyche is obviously awoken in this great violent dragging up the steps of Aphrodite's palace. And she kind of comes to in this chamber, and she knows, wow, this is a temple of Aphrodite. She can't believe that she ever mistook the temple of Hera or the temple of Demeter for a temple of Aphrodite, as the whole halls are singing with beauty. And she so recognizes the tune, the melody from within the palace of the imaginal, but it has its own sweetness that elevates it even more. But all that Psyche feels in that temple of Aphrodite is terror. And she turns and she sees her mother-in-law's eyes piercing right through her. And Aphrodite says, "How dare you? How dare you come to face me? I know what you have done, and I know what you are." And Psyche says, "Please, please, Aphrodite, please. I know you love love above all things. Please hear my love for Eros. Please hear my love. There is no human who has ever loved as fully and completely as me. Please take pity on my love. Please, I don't ask you to bring me back to Eros, but please, please tell him how sorry I am. I will leave forever if you would just tell Eros how sorry I am. How sorry I am that I didn't trust him. Please, Aphrodite, have pity on me." And Aphrodite laughs, her ringing bell-like laughter, which fills Psyche with dread. But Aphrodite, of course, is not entirely immune to feeling. She's not entirely without empathy. And so she thinks, how could she honor this love with which this human lays at her feet, whilst also having a little bit of fun, having a little bit of mischief with her? And she says, "Very well, Psyche, very well. I will relay your message to Eros if he's in a fit state to listen. I will relay your message, but there are 3 tasks that you must complete to prove to me that you're worthy of me bringing this message to my son. If you can complete these tasks, then I will do as I ask, and I will tell Eros that you have come to apologize for your foolishness and your coldness and your heartlessness." And Aphrodite claps once again, and this time the servants come in and they have 108 sacks filled with grain, poppy seeds, lentils, chickpeas, wheat, rice, maybe some quinoa is in there. And these 108 different sacks, all the grains all mixed together, all of the different seeds and legumes. And Aphrodite says, "So Psyche, your first task is you must separate each and every one of these seeds from one another into their separate correct piles. And you must do this by sundown. This is your first task. Good luck. I'll be back at sundown." And Psyche looks at these 108 sacks of millet and grain, and she reaches her hand into one. And even in that a handful, she can see that she wouldn't be able to separate all of this in a day, let alone before nightfall. And there's 108 of these sacks. Oh, and she brings her head in her hands. And she realizes that Aphrodite has no intention of truly helping her. But she thinks, "I won't give up. I won't give up. I will separate each and every one of these grains, even if it takes me 50 years. And I'm an old woman by the time I finish this first task. But at least then Eros will know that I love him. Even if I'm an old, decrepit woman, by the time I can prove it to him, I will do this task." And so she begins setting about separating each and every grain. And it is meticulous work. And even though Psyche is resolved to do it, she's still so distraught, and she's crying as she's separating the quinoa from the lentils. And as she's here doing this task, a small little colony of ants begin marching along, and one globular of tear drops down and lands on an ant, which looks up. And when the ant looks up, it recognizes Psyche. These are ants that had been burrowing around in the forest of soul. And they say, "Human, why are you crying?" And Psyche says, "Well, I long to be back with my beloved, and Aphrodite says I must separate all of these grains if I'm to ever see him again, and that I must do it by nightfall." And the ant looks at her, and the ant looks at the colony of other ants, and they all kind of shrug and go, "Well, what's the big problem? We can do that in no time." And so they call, and all the ants within earshot, which is a lot of ants, all come and they begin to work together, and they begin to separate each and every bit of wheat, every little grain of poppy seeds, of corn, of chickpeas. And really within no time at all, they've separated all of these into their separate piles. And Psyche is just so delighted and so grateful to each and every one of these ants that have come to her rescue. And she sits delighted and proud as Aphrodite strolls back in as the sun goes down. And Aphrodite frowns as she sees Psyche surrounded by these piles of correctly separated seeds. And she thinks, something's at work here. There's no way she did that by herself. There's no way. But she turns her frown into a smile and she says, "Oh, Psyche, I see I should not have doubted you. Congratulations. I'm sure that you'll be happy to take on your next task then. And for your next task, you must go to the field of the flesh-eating rams. I desire some of their wool to make a shroud. So please collect this wool, bring it back to me, and I can begin to weave my shroud." How does that sound, Psyche? And Psyche's thinking, flesh-eating rams, what? But she smiles at Aphrodite, and she makes her way out of the temple, and she travels to this field of rams. But when she gets there, she sees just how ferocious these rams are, and they're really terrifying. She can see like how huge their horns are and how great their teeth are, and all the despair that Psyche's been trying to kind of keep contained for so long, it just floods her. And there's a river that surrounds this field, and Psyche walks over to the river and she thinks, I give up. How can I contend with the power of the gods? I give up. And she leans over the edge of the river and she closes her eyes and she crosses her hands across her body and she prepares to throw herself into the river and to finally succumb to the vast currents of the wild and to let herself be carried downstream towards death. But as Psyche's kind of teetering on the edge, a reed rises up from the river and it pushes her back and it says, "Psyche, what are you doing? Do not poison the waters of this river with your despair. Why are you trying to kill yourself?" And Psyche says, "I'm completing the tasks of Aphrodite in order to make my way back to my beloved Eros, and she's set me the task of fetching the wool from this field of flesh-eating rams, and I can't do it. They'll tear me to shreds." And the reed said, "Psyche, look at the sun." And Psyche looks up at the sun god Helios, who is right at the top of the sky, right in his most burning power. And the reed says, "The rams are rambunctious in the light of the day. You cannot cross in there whilst Helios is still rolling through the sky, but wait here on my banks." And as Selene, the moon, rises once again and Nyx, the night, draws her blankets over the sky, the rams will get sleepy and they'll drop to sleep, and you'll be able to slip into the field, no problem, and gather up your wool. And Psyche is so grateful to this reed. And she just sits there singing to the reed throughout the day as she waits for Helios to set and for Selene to rise. And she looks behind her at the field, and true enough, The rams have all either wandered off into other fields or are dozing, and she just needs to walk on into the field and pick the wool that's been left on the branches. And she gathers much of this wool, much of this golden wool, which when she touches it, it's so soft. She can really see why Aphrodite would want this incredible wool to weave her shroud. And she gathers plenty up and she makes her way back to the palace of Aphrodite and climbs up the steps. And there in her arms, she has a great big, vast pile of the wool. And she says, Aphrodite, I've got your wool. And Aphrodite is, dining at the banquet with the other gods. And she slams her glass of Dionysian wine down and says, that bitch. Can't believe it. Wow, something's up here. She's having help from someone. And Aphrodite makes her way back to Psyche and she smiles, her most simpering of smiles, and says, very well. Then it is time for your third task. And she brings out a crystal womb-shaped goblet and she says, just a small cup, please, from the source of the river Styx. Bring me that waters of the immortal river, and your task shall be complete, and I'll deliver your message to Eros. Go, go, go. And Psyche thinks, wow, that sounds pretty daunting. The Styx is the river, the entrance to the underworld. If you follow the river down, then you descend into the underworld. But Psyche's been told she must ascend up. And so she makes her way to the great river and she's clambering up steep, stony steps to try and find the spring at the source of the river. But all the time, the river that is cascading, rushing next to her is telling her, don't touch our waters, human. Don't touch our waters or you will instantly die. Don't touch our waters. And the water's warning her against. But Psyche doesn't know what to do but to continue ascending up to the source of the river Styx. And when she gets there, she's terrified and she's thinking, is there any way that I could angle the cup so that the water doesn't touch me? And as she's kind of trying to work this out, there's a great shriek from the sky above and a huge eagle soars down towards Psyche. And this is the eagle Aitos, which is the eagle of the god Zeus. And Aitos has taken it upon himself to help Psyche with this third task. And we might wonder why it is that Aitos would want to help Psyche. Perhaps it's because Eros once helped this eagle to carry Ganymede, the cupbearer of Zeus, all the way up into the sky where he became the constellation Aquarius. Or perhaps there's another reason. Perhaps, after all, the goddess Hera did whisper to Zeus, is there any way that we could help the human Psyche make her way back to Eros? So perhaps Hera did find a way to have a hand in helping Psyche with these tasks after all, but we'll never know. All we know is that Aetos said, give me the cup, and fills the cup for her and flies it back with Psyche on his back, flies Psyche in this cup all the way back to Aphrodite's palace, where he sets her down at the bottom of the steps and Psyche walks up triumphant with this cup in her hand and she bows and she places her head on the marble floor as she lifts the cup to Aphrodite in offering, in honoring, in great gratitude and great pride that she has completed this third task. And Aphrodite smashes it from Psyche's hand. And she says, you foolish human. I would never deliver your message to my son, Eros. Why would I want you back by his side? There's only one place for you. I can see that these tasks are not enough suffering for you. There's only one place I would send you, and that is down to the underworld. But, Psyche, if you could get me but one thing from the underworld, I would think about helping you after all. I would think about helping you. You must go down to the underworld, find Persephone, and bring her back. Bring me back a box of Persephone's beauty. How does that sound, Psyche? Should be no small task for you. On your way, girl. And so Psyche kind of stumbles out of the palace this time, really just, she knows there's no way She knows there's no way. And she wanders through the lands, and she kind of finds eventually a great tower, which she climbs to the top of, and she thinks of all the great stories, all the great stories. And there are very few humans who have ever been down to the underworld and made it back. She says, no one, no living being can go down to the underworld and make it back. I'm just going to kill myself here. And then at least I'll be taken to the underworld as Aphrodite would wish. I'm just going to throw myself from the tower. No human can ever come back from the underworld. At which point she hears a voice say, well, what about Orpheus? And Psyche goes, oh yeah, Orpheus. Okay, but I don't have Orpheus's lyre. I can't make Orpheus's music. I must throw myself off of this tower. At which point she hears the voice say again, well, what about Hercules? It's like he says, okay, yes, Hercules, but I'm no great hero. I can't fight my way out of the underworld. I'm going to throw myself off the tower. At which point the voice says one more time, but what about Theseus? And Psyche says, that's true. Theseus does make his way out of the underworld as well. Well, maybe if Theseus could do it, maybe there is a chance that I could. And the voice says, you're a far greater hero than Theseus, Psyche. If he can make his way back, so can you. And the voice is none other than the tower itself speaking to Psyche. And it says, I know how to help you, but you must follow my instructions exactly. To make your way to the underworld, you will need a few things. You will need 2 golden coins. Go down to the bottom of my halls and you will find a sack of coins, and you can take 2 coins from there. You will also need 2 pieces of barley bread dripped in honey. And I will tell you the way to the nearest entrance to the underworld, where you will descend and make your way down to the river Styx. You must take one of your gold coins and give it to the ferryman Charon, who will carry you down the river to the halls of Hades, where you will disembark from his ship, and you will be on the way. You will see things that you must ignore. You will see a corpse floating in the river. Psyche, you must ignore this corpse, whatever it asks of you. And upon landing on the other side of the river, you will see 3 women who are weaving fabric. And whether they entice you to help them, you must ignore them, so that you can walk up to the halls of Hades, feed Cerberus one of these pieces of honey-dipped barley bread, so that Cerberus will let you in. Cerberus, the 3-headed dog who stands guard at the halls of Hades. And you will make your way in, and you will ask Persephone, and then you will make your way back out in exactly the same way as you came down. And Psyche kind of gets it all together in her head, and okay, like, yes, this sounds plausible, this sounds entirely possible. And she feels hope kind of creep back into her, and that despair which has been clinging into her bones, she feels it slightly loosen. And she makes her way down to the bottom of the tower, and she finds the 2 bits of gold, the 2 gold coins. And she says, but what about the bread? And the tower says, I don't know where you'll find the bread, Psyche. I don't know where you'll find the bread. You have to trust. And the tower tells her how to make her way to the nearest entrance to the underworld, which she does. And she makes her way to this nearest cave, this nearest crack in the earth. And there at the entrance, somehow, she finds 2 pieces of barley bread dripped in honey. And we might wonder who stepped in to offer her those bread. And I wonder if anyone listening has ever been invited into the secrets of the Eleusinian mysteries, which have their own tradition of barley and honey. And so perhaps Demeter, the guardian of those mysteries, did also have a hand in helping Psyche after all, as Psyche picks up these 2 barley breads and pockets them and makes her way down. And she takes one of the golden coins from her mouth and pays Charon, the ferryman, who begins to row her down the Styx. And sure enough, she sees a man in the water, a corpse, a rotting corpse that is reaching desperately for Psyche and calling and calling and calling for her to help him. And Psyche looks on, and she feels so grief-stricken when she sees this man, and she's so ashamed. She's so ashamed that she knows she cannot help him, but that she trusts that she must listen to the instructions of the tower and ignore that hand that reaches her from the depths of the river. and to let Charon carry on ferrying her down the stream until finally she disembarks from the boat and she sees on the banks of the river the three fates weaving their cloth, and they call to her, come and help us, girl, come and help us, girl, come and help us, girl. And their call is so demanding that Psyche feels her body begin to be drawn in their direction, but she stays steadfast and she stays walking towards the howling, barking dog Cerberus, its three heads gnashing and snarling the closer and closer Psyche gets. But she takes one of the pieces of barley bread from her pocket and drops it, and Cerberus begins devouring the bread, and Psyche can slip past him into the halls of Hades, where she walks into that black palace that's full of the mournful singing of the souls who now reside there. And she sees Hades and Persephone upon their stones, and she humbles herself to them both, and she tells them of her plight, and she tells them of her love. And perhaps if any of the gods can understand the agony of being separated from their lover, perhaps that's Hades and Persephone, who every year must spend 6 months apart from one another. And so they look at each other and they understand. And as Psyche begs for this box of beauty from Persephone, she smiles and she gives it to her willingly. And Psyche is just so grateful, and she offers all her gratitude and her honoring to Hades and Persephone. And she makes her way out of the palace, and she gives the second piece of bread to Cerberus so that she can make her way back past, and she ignores the calls of the fates, and she gives the second coin from her mouth to Charon so that he will ferry her back up the river. And once again, Psyche's heart turns to stone as she has to ignore this struggling, decaying corpse in the river, until eventually she makes her way all the way back to the bottom of that entrance to the underworld. And she makes her way up and up and up and up, and she descends into that cave, that entrance to the underworld, this mouth, this breath between upper and underworlds. And she sits there and she clutches the box to her chest, to her heart, and she feels hope. She feels hope finally. Against all the odds, she has done it. And she can be reunited with her lover Eros, even if only to tell him how sorry she is. But as she's holding that box to her heart, we remember that Psyche is not a god, but that she's a mortal, a human, and this most human of emotions washes over her. Curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Psyche thinks, what is in the box? What is it that Aphrodite so desires? What is this beauty of Persephone that Aphrodite would send me to the underworld to reclaim? And so Psyche thinks, what harm can it do if I catch a glimpse at what's inside? And she opens the box and it's empty, but a black cloud emanates out of the box and it diffuses Psyche's whole senses, and Psyche is sent into a deep, deep, deep slumber. A slumber that is deeper than death. And she lies there in that entrance to the underworld. So close was she to stepping back into the upper world. And just as Psyche is slipping into this ceaseless sleep, finally, another being is waking back up. And up there on Mount Olympus, Eros stirs. And he feels a feeling coming back into himself other than the agony and the betrayal that he's been so subsumed by for so long. And he feels something else stirring in him, and he begins to wake back up, and he awakens and looks around the room and thinks, where am I? I'm in my mother's halls. What am I doing here? Mother, what's going on? And Aphrodite hears Eros and she calls him down and she says, well, I thought it best that I take care of you. And he says, but what about my wife? Where's Psyche? And Aphrodite kind of looks awkwardly away and says, well, I might have sent her to the underworld. Which point Eros is, what? You've done what? That's my wife, mother. You can't be sending her down to the underworld. She's immortal. How will she ever make her way back out? And so Eros kind of goes into a panic and thinks, okay, how will I find her? How will I find her? And he begins searching the whole lands, and he begins searching in every known entrance to the underworld, of which there are many entrances to the underworld. And perhaps we all know our own particular entrances to the underworld. Until eventually Eros finds that entrance where Psyche is fast asleep. And he sees her, and he sees her just as he saw her that first time, asleep. But this time it's a dreamless sleep, and he can hear the emptiness of her breath. And he can see the grief on her skin. And he can see all of the agonies that she's been living through whilst he's been writhing in his own blinded agony. And he goes up to Psyche, and he holds her in his vast arms. And as he looks upon his wife, and he sees the weariness, and he sees the pain, and he sees the hopelessness that has befallen her again and again, he finds that she is to him more beautiful than ever. And that all of this experience has just enriched Psyche with even more life force. And so he brings his lips towards her, and with his godly divine kiss, he brings her back to life, and Psyche stirs in his arms, and she awakens, and she's greeted back by the eyes of her beloved. And she knows that it was all worth it, all of the agony, all of the pain, all of the despair was worth it in order to find herself back here once again. And together they go to Mount Olympus, and they descend up his mother's steps, and Aphrodite greets them begrudgingly. And she can see that the wound is still causing Eros a lot of pain. This wound from the oil lamp, and the wound of being so lost from Psyche for so long. And Aphrodite then does something which only a mother can. She brings her hand to Eros's shoulder, and she lets herself drink in all of that pain of that epic wound that Eros has been bearing for so long. And she lets all of that pain enter into her own body, where she can hold it as a mother can. And she knows that in removing this pain from Eros, she's giving him back great joy and pleasure that he can share with this woman who he has chosen as his wife, and who Aphrodite is finally willing to see as an equal, as a daughter-in-law. And all of the other gods and goddesses from Olympus gather, and they witness this sacred union of Psyche and Eros. And Zeus, the king of the gods, and in many ways the king of love. No one loves love, enjoys love as much as Zeus. And so he's so touched by the power of feeling that is emanating from between Psyche and Eros. And so he says that she may become immortal. And so Psyche becomes a goddess herself. And the union of these two, of Eros, of love, of Psyche and soul, bears a child. And that child, which is birthed from their union, is called Hedone, which the Romans called volupta. It means pleasure. It means pleasure. And so pleasure is birthed from this union of Psyche and Eros, and all of the despair and agony that they must live through in order to also be able to hold on to their love. And that's it. That's it. That's how soul and love make their way back to one another through all of the pain and the excruciating aloneness and the distrust and the despair. This is how they make their way back to one another. And back to pleasure.
Wow. Thank you, Libby. I mean, what a journey. I'm so struck by even from the point at which Psyche gets, dressed up ready for the funeral, and she tells the family to turn away, it's too late. Just even from that point, like following her journey, it's really, she was very powerful even from then. So much power in that moment.
Yeah, in being able to trust the unknown, I guess, to be able to go, okay, well, there's only one way through this, and it's forward. It's forward. And that's what kind of continues to propel her through the story as she's even dragged through kind of more and more loss and even more confusion and even more despair, that she somehow continues moving forward. And it's something I was thinking about today when I was kind of thinking on the story of how rare that seems in our approach to love these days, how easy it is to be shunned by loved, or to be when our vanity or our self-worth is kind of disregarded, to be, to turn on love, to turn away from love, and to want to run in the other direction, and to want to make the object of love suddenly a narcissist, or to make it a monster, or to make it something that is easier for us to deny that it was real, or easier for us to deny that it mattered, than it is for us to accept how beautiful it is, or it was, and certainly to continue to go in pursuit of it. And so like I really honor that, this story, this being, this human whose name Psyche means soul, that soul never gives up on love, that soul continues to pursue love even when there seems like there's no hope, that soul wants to still go in pursuit of that pleasure and that love.
Yes, and that that in experiencing all of the grief and the agony, there is a discovery, there is a knowing, there is something revealed that is connects then into pleasure. That reveals that true, like you said, never broken thread of love, of pleasure. Yeah, it's really it's just so beautiful. I so appreciate you sharing that story with us. Thank you.
It's my favorite story, and so it's such a gift to be able to tell it, and I never know what I'm going to tell, so that was a very long retelling. So it's hard for me to make that thread shorter when it's kind of pulling me along. So thank you for letting me continue to be carried along by it. And I guess, just like the great stories can't easily be put into boxes or be seen from a black and white lens, they also don't always want to be edited. So thank you for letting this this vast story. And in a way, it's it's a myth, but it's also in a way the first fairy tale. I think that at least my copy of the Golden Ass, it begins with once upon a time. So we have that first kind of step towards, it's not just mythic, but that once upon a time there lived a king and a queen who had three very beautiful daughters. And there's echoes, of course, of this story in Beauty and the Beast. There's echoes of it in Cinderella. There's echoes of it even in Phantom of the Opera. And these kind of stories of when, like, yeah, this shift between love being something that's monstrous and delicious, and how do we trust what feels good even when it might be scary, or the world might be telling us that it's that it's not okay.
Mm.
I still want to dive into that pleasure.
Mm. Well, there was an absolute pleasure in the depth and the detail that you went into in the storytelling. Like, I'm even still in uh, the hummus or the compost of the leaves and pan. That was one of the images that really struck me, and the bugs and the set. It's such a sensuous telling of that story. I just
Mm.
so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if
Yeah.
anyone ever has a chance to go to the Cave of Pan in Greece, and I so recommend it. I went a few months ago and I was so exhausted. I honestly felt like Psyche in that decay, just being like, just let me, like, just let me sleep. Let me rot. And I went to the Cave of Pan, and even just being at the mouth of the cave, I felt my whole self be reanimated. And I think like Pan does have this energy, this great power of, yeah, like filling us back with aliveness once again. And so I love that he gets to stumble on into this story and do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
Well, for anyone who has listened to this and fallen in love with Libby, I think a little like I have just now, listening and being witness to that story. She has a couple of free things that we've linked below. Olivia, I'd love you just to talk to those briefly, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course. So uh I'm a dream witch, which means I'm, very devoted to bringing people back to the dreaming ways, back to the dream realm. And so I have a free portal on my website called the Dream Cave, which has lots of different dreaming practices. I have a dream school called Embodied Dream Weaving. So they're my kind of practices that I teach to bring the dreaming world back online, and for how you can play with dream and waking life. And within that there's also my retelling of Ariadne, which is one of the characters from the great story of Theseus and the Minotaur. So there's also another story embedded in there in the dream cave if people would like to delve even more into these stories, and to see which parts of that story enliven their souls.
Beautiful. Thank you
Mm.
so much, Libby.
Yeah, thank you, Viv. It's such a pleasure. I did the same pun. It's such a joy to be here.
It is a pleasure. It's true. It's a pleasure. It's just been divine. Thank you.
Thank you so much.